Hello students, welcome to this lecture. Today we will be learning about bureaucracy and development administration. Let's have a look on the objectives of this lecture. To understand the concept of bureaucracy and development administration. To assess the importance of competent bureaucracy for the development of administration. To examine critically the compatibility between the bureaucratic culture and development administration. Now, dear students, let's start the lecture. Development has become the center of politics of most of developing countries. The major agency for development is the administrative machinery, which is known as bureaucracy in public administration. Every developing country is engaged in upliftment of the socio-economic condition through extensive and intensive programs and projects. For this purpose, they need to make policies. Policy formulation varies from countries to countries. It will depend on the type of political structure and philosophy of one state. Bureaucracy, who is known as the backbone of the government, makes public policies, implement them and evaluate them. In short, we can say that they are completely responsible for the developmental process of a country. Bureaucracies are crucial to political systems the world over and have been so recognized quite openly. With so much talk of new economic order, interest in the study of humanistic phenomenon has markedly increased because there is hardly any alternative instrument of implementation of the programs of social and economic change. In the 1950s, development administration emerged as a vehicle to usher in speedy development in the post-colonial Third World. It had its origin in the desire of the richer countries to aid the poorer countries, and more especially in the obvious needs of newly emerging states to transform their colonial bureaucracies into more responsible instruments of societal change. The simple underlying conception was that the transfer of resources and know-how would hasten the modernization process from agrarian to industrial, using government and public-sponsored bodies as change agents. For more than a decade, it captivated the minds of scholars, and various experiments were undertaken to adapt administration to the development needs. The concept of bureaucracy and development administration looked so promising that it was recognized as a sub-discipline of public administration. In this lecture, an attempt has been made to answer the two fundamental questions which are causing concern the world over. A. To what extent is bureaucracy a viable instrument for implementation in development administration? B. What type of organizational setup is necessary to perform developmental tasks effectively? Now, dear students, let's have a look on bureaucracy and development administration. The term development administration has almost exclusively been used with reference to the developing nations of the Asia, Africa and Latin America. It was seen as a mechanism for attainment of socio-economic progress and nation building in the third world nations. However, its conceptual genre has been distinctly Western, the impetus for which can be traced to Robert Dale's article, The Science of Public Administration, Three Problems, in which he criticized public administration for its inability to develop a comparative perspective. The term development administration was first used by an Indian civil servant, U.L. Goswami, in his article entitled The Structure of Development Administration in India in 1955, in the context of community development programs. However, the conceptualization and elaboration of the concept were done by the Western, especially American scholars such as George F. Gantt, F. W. Riggs, Edward Widener, Milton J. Essman, Hen B. Lee, John D. Montgomery, and Alfred Demant. The most important single contribution in the field came from the Comparative Administrative Group in USA, formed in 1961 under the aegis of the American Society for Public Administration. Disappointed with the result of the US government's Technical Assistance Program for Public Administration in the developing countries, the members of the Comparative Administrative Group undertook research and seminars on the administrative problems of some of the third world nations. Their research findings revealed that Western development models and concepts of public administration might not be appropriate or feasible in developing nations. This led to the search for a new administrative model which met the developmental needs of the developing nations. Thus, Third World development became a very powerful intellectual discourse in the American social science thinking of the 1950s. Two interrelated goals for this can be identified. The first underlying proposition and latent goal was that with sufficient foreign aid and a revamped administrative system, these new nations would closely follow, if not altogether achieve, the industrial progress of the West. The implicit goal, it now seems, was to counter the Marxist-Leninist ideological prescription, offering a class-less society. New nations had to be saved from the appeals of communism. Thus, administration was looked as having system maintenance and system stability, building potential capacity. Bureaucratization was considered a functional prerequisite for maintaining stability and legitimacy in the political order. In short, the main reason for the birth and the growth of the concept of development administration and bureaucracy are A. The emergence of new decolonized nations after the Second World War. B. The emergence of international and the US economic and technical plans for assistance to developing nations. And C. The establishment of the Comparative Administrative Group and the interest shown by its members in developing nations and their administrative systems. Owing to these factors, since the 1960s, development administration has become a dominant concept and acquired immense importance in the developing nations. The key objective was transformation of existing government machinery into a new entity. This was to be accomplished through administrative development, that is, modernization of government machinery through external inducement, transfer of technology, training by foreign experts, and setting up of institutions of public administration in developing countries. Thus, development administration emerged closely tied to foreign aid and Western formula for development planning, which was supposed to have equal and universal applicability in developing nations. Now, students, let's see public administration and development administration. A distinction is made between public administration and development administration. Public administration assumes traditional tasks which correspond with the state's traditional social and economic roles, whereas development administration lies outside the traditional area and is suited to new tasks. Therefore, public administration tasks are static and highly bureaucratic, whereas those of development administration are constantly increasing and varying. Further, a distinction is made between development administration and administrative development. The former refers to all activities concerned with formulation, implementation, and evaluation of policies and programs, whose aim is to produce economic and social changes. The latter means development of organizations, techniques, and methods, and enhancement of administrative capability. Development administration in the developing countries differ from those in the developed ones. Although both developed and developing countries are characterized by the steadily expanding role of governmental institutions and agencies, expansion in the roles of the former relies on a broad base of potentials and active participation from the private sector, whereas the latter not only lacks such a base and participation but also occurs within conditions where it would be too late to wait for potentials to grow or for the public sector to be mobilized. Change administration is another name for development administration, for administration plays an essential part in bringing about and controlling change. In other words, it's an influential factor in effecting development. Administration, particularly public administration in the developing countries, is assigned the responsibility of achieving development objectives. Though development administration is considered a part of public administration, actually it represents a dynamic administration. Principally, it includes the agency responsible for economic planning and also for identifying the resources essential to raise the national income. It also involves various organizations related to the process of comprehensive change, such as those which contribute to acceleration of industrial and natural resources development and to improvements of the infrastructure. Further, it involves all other institutions which take part in raising economic or social standards. In brief, the concept of development administration and bureaucracy is the process of carrying out development programs and projects in the direction of nation building and socio-economic progress through an administrative organization. The primary objective of development administration is to strengthen the administrative machinery, which would bring about socio-economic change. It's concerned with the establishment of social justice through equitable distribution of social and economic benefits among the various social groups in society. Its aim is to promote economic growth by industrialization. Development administration is also concerned with political development, which includes A. Equality, B. The capacity of the political system to produce according to demands, and C. Differentiation of governmental roles and organizations in the process of meeting their challenges. It attempts to bring about change in the values and attitudes of people, which differ from the existing ones and are supportive of the developmental activities. Development administration also requires administrative modernization, that is, creation of new administrative structures and reorientation of the existing ones to suit the needs of developmental programs. Thus, the role of bureaucracy in development administration aims at transforming an entire society with social, economic, political, and administrative elements intermeshed for purposes of change. The essence of development administration is to bring about change through integrated, organized, and properly directed governmental action. In the recent past, the governments in most of the developing nations have shifted their focus on development by means of planned change and people's participation. With this shift of administrative concern towards developmental objectives, the researchers and practitioners of public administration have been forced to conceptualize the developmental situation and to bridge the gaps in administrative theory. The growing welfare functions of the government have brought into limelight the limitations of the traditional theory of bureaucracy. The essence of administration or bureaucracy in the present conditions lies in its capacity to bring about change in the structure and behavior of different administrative institutions, to develop an acceptance for the change and to create a system which can sustain change and improve the capacity of institutions to change. All this calls for renewed efforts on the part of institutions engaged in the tasks of development. Thus, development administration as an area of study and as means to realize developmental goals assume importance. Dear students, let's have a look on the development administration and bureaucratic culture. The conceptualization of development administration is greatly indebted to the comparative administrative group formed under the ASPA in 1961. The comparative administrative group was put together by a small group of political scientists and students of public administration who had been frustrated and disappointed with efforts at technical assistance for public administration in developing countries. As the long-time chairman in 1961 to 70 of the comparative administrative group, that's Fred W. Ricks, came to be regarded as the prime mover of academic interest in the field of development administration. The Ford Foundation gave financial support to the comparative administrative group, which was interested in the analysis of the relationship between administrative system and its socio-political, economic and cultural context, especially in the developing countries. Fred W. Ricks defines development administration as organized efforts to carry out programs or projects thought by these involved to serve developmental objectives. According to Donald C. Stone, broadly, development administration is concerned with achieving national development. In his opinion, it's primarily concerned with the tasks and processes of formulating and implementing the 4 Ps. So, what are these 4 Ps? Plans, policies, programs, and projects. in respect to developmental goals and objectives. If it is preoccupied with programmatic management, development administration may be understood as organized efforts to carry out programs or projects thought by those in power to serve the developmental objectives of society. Some people in positions of responsibility in the public and private sectors in third world countries view development administration as the maximum utilization of available resources. They rank institutions of planning, industry, and education as directly relevant and as playing essential roles in development. This possibly explains why planning, industrialization, and education are considered indispensable for development, even though far more than these are required. In recent times, the role played by government administration in social and economic fields has grown regardless of the nature of the system. In India too, the role of the government administration is dominant for a variety of reasons, especially the nature of the economic structure and the absence of an active private sector. However, these countries, means third world countries, have not yet utilized their natural resources in a way that can most efficiently serve the purpose of development. It is administration there that constitutes the decisive factor in the development process. Bureaucratization has swept the third world countries, including the South Asian countries, since the 1950s. Bureaucratization means two things. A, bureaucratic growth, that is expansion in public bodies of the sort that can be measured by increase in the number of administrative units and personnel, as well as the rise in public expenditure, including in particular wages and salaries. And B, an orientation whereby the administrative and technical aspects dominate over the social aspects. Generally, it is a tendency that goes very much in the direction of centralization, hierarchy, and control. Both aspects of bureaucratization have grown substantially in the third world countries, including India in the last 4 decades. It's remarkable how extensively and rapidly the bureaucracy has expanded in South Asian states, even though the relative weight of the various causes of this expansion has differed from one type of country to another. 4 criteria are used to measure bureaucratic growth. We can discuss them as: first, increase in the number of administrative units. Second, increase in the number of public employees. Third, increase in current government expenditure. And within that, fourth, increase in the wages and salaries of the employees. In considering the extent of bureaucratic growth, these 4 criteria should be taken together in the sense that a relatively limited, slow increase in one category at any particular stage should not distract us from observing the phenomenon of bureaucratic growth in its totality, that is, as represented by a combination of all 4 factors together. However, the important point to be noted here is that the Rixian analysis of bureaucracy opens up an interesting discussion on bureaucratic culture. In the developing countries, the culture of bureaucracy is a hangover of the colonial regime. Under a system of bureaucratic rule, the general culture of bureaucracy during the colonial period had been authoritarian, centralist, and people avoiding. With the passing away of colonialism, the popular regimes that had come to replace imperial rule were confronted with the problem of transforming the ruling bureaucracy into civil servants accountable to political leadership and the people. The culture of bureaucracy had been a well-known theme in the Weberian description of the ways of bureaucratic functioning. For instance, Weber referred to the power position of a fully developed bureaucracy and the tendency of bureaucratic administration to keep its knowledge and action secret. As a general theme, bureaucratic culture may be profitably linked to total societal culture. B. Guy Peters talks of two kinds of model cultures: rationalist or deductive culture and pragmatic or empirical cultures. The bureaucratic concept of universality and impersonality of rules can be associated with rationalistic or deductive cultures. Most developed countries exhibit these cultures that tend to emphasize the deduction of specific statements from general statements. The rule-bound administration is generally accepted by the administrator and the client. By contrast, in a system of pragmatic or empirical culture, generalities are derived from innumerable individual decisions. In some sense, each case is a unique one, and the special features of the case call for the modification and even rejection of general rules. This situation comes closest to English common law practices. As Peter observes, and I quote, "The concept of individuality and individual rights as one component of the more empirical culture tend to make the job of the bureaucrat more difficult and forces more attention on specifics rather than on the generalities of the case." Unquote. The situation in the developing countries is a mix of these two model cultures. Apparently, elaborate rules and regulation exist to order administrative behavior and action. In practice, the situation can be described as "show me the man, I will show you the rule." Thus, formal rules are either decorative pieces or harassing instruments. Whatever it suits the ruling class, the rules are bypassed with impunity. To sum up, bureaucratic culture in any country is a fairly regular way of administrative functioning, conditioned by shared beliefs, norms, values, and feelings among the members of the administrative class. It grows over time through a steady process of evolution. Hence, it has certain permanence about it. At the same time, major societal changes impact on bureaucratic culture and bring about a new or modified culture. Now, dear students, let's see the problems of bureaucratization over development administration. While on the one hand, the use of bureaucracy leads to efficiency, on the other, it gives rise to certain problems. Thus, bureaucratization results in an emphasis on routine and detail, leads to red tape, which we can say delay also, and gives rise to complaints of unresponsiveness of the bureaucracy to the people. The bureaucracy has a tendency to expand so that in the course of time, a large portion of the expenditure on a program goes for paying the bureaucracy instead of meeting the objectives. Thus, in a program for the development of fisheries, the help given to fishermen may turn out to be less than the salaries and allowances drawn by the bureaucracy. Other more important problems are related to the power of the bureaucracy. The power of the bureaucracy arises from its role in policy formulation and implementation. In developing countries, because of the weakness of interest groups and political parties, the bureaucracy often comes to play an important role. While politicians may be amateurs, they represent the people and have to take into account their needs and aspirations. Bureaucrats, however, are under no such compulsion. They often pay more attention to their own interests. Hence, it is a condition of democracy that the bureaucracy should remain firmly under the control of the elected representatives of the people. In most developing countries, however, the bureaucracy tends to be too powerful. Indeed, in many of these countries, the military and the civil bureaucracy together assume full power, remove the democratically elected rulers, and themselves become rulers. Such dictatorships are in existence in many developing countries. The way to deal with these problems is to make the people aware of their rights and power by educating them, organizing them in associations and political parties, and to develop bodies of local self-government through which the people can rule themselves with less dependence on the bureaucracy. Finally, dear students, let's conclude this lecture. Since very long, in a governmental setup, bureaucrats play a very important role in all spheres of the developmental activities. In this regard, they are considering as an expert of their field rather than the ministers of assigned department. They work as an expert, as an advisory body in the governmental system. Bureaucracy is the sovereign factor in development administration. It's also called manpower management, personnel management, labor welfare management, and so on. Bureaucracy, popularly known as the backbone of the governmental organization, actively participates in the public policy formulation process as well as implementation and evaluation. Development administration is primarily concerned with planning, policy formulation, program implementation, and socio-economic development. As bureaucracy plays number of important roles in development process in which formulation of policy, implementation of policy, delegated legislation, and administrative adjudication are core functions of the bureaucrats. Bureaucracy also ensures the development through continuous evaluation and vigilance. Nowadays, we witness the emergence of a concept called development administration. The focus is now to make administration more people-friendly and goal-oriented. Development administration is now viewed as the process of guiding an organization towards the achievement of progressive political, economic, and social objectives that are authoritatively determined in one manner or another. Bureaucracy can play a pivotal role in development administration. So, dear students, it was all about today's lecture on bureaucracy and development administration. Hope you got good inputs on it. We'll meet again to discuss another lecture. Till then, take care. Goodbye.